Welcome to the Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bodies that haunt Hollywood and try to find out why they went to their grave. This week, more like the empty movie theater, this is The Empty Man.
This is a tale of horror and blood. Let's go! Stop it!
Welcome to the Blast Zone.
Welcome to the Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I'm Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Shudder account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a demon with horns and bat wings and summonings about movies.
Movies like The Empty Man, which we're talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
You know, I got plenty to worry about in my real life. But right now, at this moment, this movie that we're talking about this week has my brain tied in knots. I need to do this episode so I can have at least a modicum of peace again and let my brain empty back out.
Are you waking up in the middle of the night at 3:03 every evening just with visions of the empty man in your head?
I can't tell you how many times I walked down my hallway swinging a baseball bat and there was nobody there.
That's troubling. No, this is a head scratcher. This is going to be a fun one to talk about. And maybe not fun. It's going to be an endurance test for us and the listeners.
A little bit.
That might sound like we don't like this movie, but at least myself, I rather do like this movie. It's just kind of a difficult one to untangle.
It's a brain twister. I like it better after my second watch. I gave you a lot of flack about how much I didn't like it after the first.
We're going to put that on your grave, Ian. When you pass away, I'll be very sad. I'll probably be dead already, by the way. I liked it better on my second watch. That's kind of like your personal mantra now.
I hope they let me do that with life. Do I get to go through life a second time and go, hey, this is better than I thought. I didn't remember all this stuff.
I'm okay with the one. Just leave me there. Man, I don't know if you guys can hear. I think I was sick when we recorded the Last Night in Soho episode, and I'm still sick. You're treated to another week of my gravelly, bassy voice.
It's a spooky season special.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of fits the tone of the season. So that's one thing we got going for us.
Probably you should stop doing your Crypt Keeper impression with your wife and kids all day. Maybe your throat could heal up.
I will not stop doing that. That's tradition, and tradition matters here. But before we start talking more about The Empty Man, I got to find out, did you happen to watch anything this week that would be fun to share with the listeners?
I did. I went fully festive for the season. I tried to pull off a spooky season double feature. Ooh. Stephen King, the master himself, happened to recommend both these movies to people on Twitter. He went out and said, these are great. You got to watch them. So I checked out Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which is a Stephen King story, and a movie called Lou, which is not a Stephen King story.
No self-interest there, Stephen King. Like, I highly recommend this movie based on my book. Or yes. I think it was a short story, was it?
Yeah, it was like a novella. It was kind of in between. This other one he recommended called Lou, as far as I know, he doesn't have a financial interest in that. They're both new movies. They're both out on Netflix, dropped at the top of October. They both have great veteran actors in them. Donald Sutherland is the titular Mr. Harrigan, and Allison Janney is the titular Lou.
Who plays his phone?
The phone is uncredited.
Interesting.
It's a clunky old round bubbly iPhone from way back in the day.
It's a period piece from 2013.
There's some other young faves in this. Your guy, Logan Marshall Green, is in Lou, and he's good. All the actors were good, but both the movies overall were just a little bit meh. They weren't terrible, but it wasn't the Blastober thrill ride that I hoped Stephen King would send me on. They were both kind of tame. And Lou is a thriller. Lou is not a supernatural horror movie.
I was going to ask, because Lou seemed more like a crime thriller.
Yeah, it's kind of a contemporary child abduction political thriller. Harrigan's Phone is a straight-up Stephen King haunted phone story, but I can't strongly recommend either one.
Let me wax poetic about my boy for a second here, Logan Marshall Green. I feel like I say this once a month, but if you guys have not watched Quarry and you have access to Cinemax or my Plex account, please do so and watch Quarry as soon as possible. And yes, I am looking directly at you, Ian, as I say this. One of the greatest one-season shows ever. It would have been great to get a second season, but it also tells a pretty self-contained story, so you won't feel that letdown of a cliffhanger ending or something.
I gotta watch that. But let me just say, I took your other Logan Marshall Green recommendation and watched the sci-fi one.
Upgrade,
yes. That was fun.
That's a fun one, yeah. I would love to talk about that more in depth. And I'm just a big Logan Marshall Green fan, but my movie has nothing to do with him. I said movie, you might have noticed, because it's been a while since I've brought a movie to show and tell. I've been doing a lot of shows, a lot of rewatches, so it's been tough to find time for movies, but I sat my ass down and I said, you know what? I'm going to watch Bullet Train. And I got half an hour into it and I said, I don't want to watch Bullet Train anymore. Not a fan. I might finish it one day, but no thank you. And I said, you know what? I'm going to put on something a little quieter because Bullet Train's very loud. loud and kind of dumb. But I watched Emily the Criminal, which is a quieter crime thriller starring Aubrey Plaza. Aubrey Plaza is the titular Emily. It's a kind of a very different role for her. I mean, we've seen her do straight drama before, like Black Bear was last year's. It was really good. She seems to be turning into a real powerhouse dramatic actress. And this movie's great. It's kind of low stakes, mild. No one's saving the world. No one's walking away with hundreds of millions of dollars. It's kind of like low level scheming and just trying to get by in this fucked up capitalist nightmare that we're all in.
Relatable.
It's got a lot to say about student debt and the gig economy and all that type of stuff.
That's fun.
But it's breezy. It's an hour and a half. It's well made. She's great in it. It's got a Theo Rossi in another key role. And I've always been a Theo Rossi guy. If you watch Sons of Anarchy, he had a big role in that. Also in Luke Cage, the Netflix show. He's a guy you'd recognize, even if you don't necessarily know his name. So yeah, I'd say go check it out. It's a fun one. It's relatively new, I think. So a lot of listeners may not have had it on their radar. Worth your time. So The Empty Man, Ian. This is another relatively new one. I just realized we're doing 2-hour plus supernatural horror movies that were released in the last like 3 years for Blastober. Is that the kind of theme we're going with?
It's a pretty cool run. I'm not sure how the month is going to finish up, but yeah, we're just basically hitting the anniversary of all these movies. It's either their first, second, or third anniversary.
What was your introduction to The Empty Man? I think I talked about it on Show and Tell like a long time ago, maybe not quite a year ago because I didn't see it in theaters, but relatively soon after it got on streaming, I tuned into it. Did you try to watch it before? Did you do your patented 20-minute test run?
No, you know what? Apologies, but I don't remember you talking about it. I honestly didn't think I'd ever heard of this movie until you put it on the Blastober calendar. It was almost like the movie was created out of nothing 3 days before I watched it.
Oh boy. Now I can't tell if the rest of what you just said is serious, if you were just really committing to the bit.
No, I really like it. Didn't register with me. If you told me about it, I had forgotten. And other than that, it didn't register with anybody. Like the studio, you'll tell the story of it. They pretty much created it a week before it came out and hey, world, here's a trailer. Here's a movie. Go maybe watch it or don't.
Yeah, to know how much the studio loved this movie, David Pryor, the writer and director, had to pay to go see it at the movie theater when it was out because he was like, oh, it's in theaters? They didn't have a premiere, not a screening for the cast and crew or anything. He just had to go buy a ticket and see it.
That's cold.
In Orange County like everyone else.
That's kind of fucked up, gotta say.
It is. It was not the smoothest trip to the Cinemax for this movie. I think I first heard about this movie through Adam Naiman, who is a writer and film critic, contributor to The Ringer, and among other things, also a professor of film at the University of Toronto, I believe. He was just kind of shouting from the mountaintops about this movie and how much he liked it, giving it all kinds of praise. And he was not alone. Everyone who reviewed it as a theatrical release tended to hate it. And then everyone who reviewed it when it was already like available on VOD seemed to love it. I think it's a issue with expectations versus execution, but like everything about this movie, from the marketing to the name to even like the cast to some extent, because there's a lot of teenagers in the cast, even though they don't factor into the overall movie so much. It seems like it's going to be one of those little PG-13 horror movies like The Bye-Bye Man or Ouija, you know, like those type of movies that are a dime a dozen, get spit out 10 a year, and they make a little profit and they disappear. No one ever thinks about them again. I keep bringing up The Bye-Bye Man, but I hate that fucking movie so much.
I didn't know about that one until learning about this movie, because everyone brings up The Bye-Bye Man when they talk about The Empty Man.
It's a truly horrible movie. But yes, this movie seems like it's going to be one of those, and you might go into it thinking like, oh, cool, fun little romp. I'll see some teenagers die in agony for 90 minutes and then I'll go home. But no, you're treated to a 2-hour and 20-minute meditation on grief, cult mindsets, and questioning your reality and Lovecraftian horrors. And then the movie refuses to hold your hand to an extent that almost might be too much. I'm always saying, trust your audience. You don't have to over-explain everything. But then I'm like, hold on now. Maybe you should explain some things. So like audiences hated it. And I think that colored some of the critics' response to it. It was getting horrible cinema scores. But then once it started making the rounds on video on demand, critics were coming out of the woodwork to be like, no, actually, this is really good, thoughtful movie making. And everyone just kind of missed the fucking point. So I checked it out then and I really enjoyed it. And I thought it would be a good one for us to check out.
It's a challenging one. It's a bigger challenge than I thought. I thought it was going to be a challenge just because they're like, oh, it's a scary contemporary horror movie that was just going to make me poop my pants. And that's how I went into it. So I think I had some of that same experience as test audiences, as real audiences had, just like not knowing what it was. And to be fair to Pryor, you can say, okay, the marketing wasn't good. People didn't know what it was. But he's the one who put the teenagers in it. He put the slasher stuff in it. He put the big red herrings that this is a urban legend boogeyman movie. All those threads are in the movie. It's not like someone like assigned them to it because they weren't paying attention and they didn't notice what was in there. They're all in there. There's all this other stuff in there too. So it's just full of stuff. And it is hard. Even once you start to like the things that you see him doing that are clever and spooky and cool and mystifying, those other things still make you go, well, why did you put that in there? What does that even mean? Or what are you trying to do with this? And we'll touch on those as we go through the story. But it's still a movie that confounds me, even though it delighted me a little bit more on my second watch.
I will say, like, maybe the movie's biggest weakness is that it wants to confound you to some extent. Like, it wants to play with you a little bit. And I think that there's a place for that in movie making. You just have to know the limit. And at some point, people will resist that. And I think that some people will just push past their breaking point for that kind of manipulation. Because, yeah, the movie does lie to you about what's happening a lot. That makes it fun on a rewatch because there is a lot of extra layers to go back to and kind of look at things through a new lens. But it also is frustrating if you're not going to immediately turn around and watch it 2 days after you watch it the first time like we do. Not everyone has that viewing habit because not everyone is looking to discuss it in depth on a podcast.
I also think the movie, it has this sort of flat affect, which is part of the style, right? The protagonist of the movie is this jaded, sorrowful man. So the movie takes on his tone where everything's kind of cold and quiet and a little bit solemn. And so what it doesn't do is it doesn't acknowledge, as it makes these turns from one type of movie into another and peel back its own layers, it doesn't go, aha, look, we just peeled back a layer. It just kind of keeps trudging. And so you're like, wait a minute, did it just trudge me into a whole nother genre? And I attribute that a little bit to David Pryor's personality now that I've heard him speak for a total of 45 minutes on a podcast. He seems like kind of a self-serious guy. And I feel like, yeah, he didn't want to like wave the wand and turn the movie around on you. He just wanted to keep kind of plowing and have you go, what the fuck? And so a lot of those what the fucks are not fun for people.
Yeah, you could say this movie changes genres a few times. Like it's a wilderness survival horror, then it's a teen slasher horror, and then it's like a noir horror, and then it's a Lovecraft. But the movie's tone never changes. It's not taking on much of those characteristics of those type of movies outside of like the machinations of the plot. So when it's like a teen slasher, it doesn't have that like giddiness and that kind of silliness that teen slashers have. It's still everyone walking around, looking at the floor, and just like, yeah,
it's dark.
You know, we went to this bridge and we like, but there's, like you said, almost no affectation. There's almost no levity in this movie. It's almost completely humorless. But like you said, now that we've both listened to David Pryor talk, he doesn't seem like the guy who's interested in making people laugh with his movies. He wants to make them think and he wants to make them a little afraid. And I think he does both those things well. But sure, yeah, I don't know that entertainment in that kind of popcorn sense is on his list of priorities.
It's almost an opposite to Edgar Wright, who we covered last week, who is just constantly trying to wow and entertain you and always has a sense of humor, even in his dark moments. This guy does not.
I mean, he came up with our boy David Fincher. So
yeah,
I was trying to come up with a cute nickname for David Fincher, even though like his name is just not nicknameable. Like I was going to be like Davey F. And I was like, no one's going to know who that is. But yeah, I'll get into it more, but he got his start in film in a big way, working on extras and behind the scenes featurettes for DVDs and Blu-ray releases and for several directors, but notably he worked with Fincher quite a few times and seems to have absorbed a lot of his sensibilities about filmmaking.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way.
And David Fincher is not exactly a laugh a minute type of guy.
No.
Although I will say, like, his movies can be subtly funny. I think Zodiac is a very underrated, funny movie, but that tends to be the exception more than the rule.
And it takes time. Like you and I both started after our second watches and talking about it, we started realizing, oh, wait a minute, I think maybe he's trying to be funny here. Or look, this character is being a little more high-spirited than we gave him credit for on the first watch. But it's not obvious because the tone of the film kind of makes you discount anything you think you see that even starts to feel like humor. It kind of misses you because you are not in a mode to receive that.
We got to talk a little bit about, we're with James Badge Dale for literally just about the entire movie. I think there's very few scenes he's not in. And he has a comedic persona that's very dry, very world weary. So that's the only type of humor we get is through his performance. And that's about as funny as he gets. Not saying he's humorless. That's just who he tends to play, is kind of downtrodden, heavy drinking ex-cops. Like I've seen quite a few roles where he plays almost this exact same character. I watch Hightown, which is a show on Stars. Like you could literally swap in their characters and they behave almost exactly the same way.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, it's he's also really good in this though. I quite like his performance.
Yeah.
Especially once you have to watch it again and you can piece together what he's trying to do with it to kind of show you what's going on with his character's internal life.
He's a fine actor. He's charismatic. He was likable on the first pass, but likewise, I got so much more out of the very subtle expressions on his face the second time. And I'm like, oh, he's thinking about this right now. And now I get what's going through this character's head. It's subtle, but it's fun.
You want me to get into the making of the movie? It's a twisty, windy road. This is probably our longest monologue in a few episodes.
Nice. Let's hear how this thing happened.
In 2014, writer Cullen Bunn created a comic book series called The Empty Man for Boom Studios. Along with artist Vanessa R. Del Rey, the comic was a success and the rights to adapt it were sold to 20th Century Fox on February 9th, 2016. David Pryor, who had primarily worked on supplemental behind-the-scenes materials for DVD and Blu-ray releases, particularly the films of David Fincher, was hired to write and direct the adaptation in his full-length film debut. Pryor took the name of the story, and honestly that's about it, imagining an entirely new story centered around a haunted ex-cop investigating a shocking series series of suicides. James Badge Dale was cast in the lead, and a reliable group of "hey, I know that person" actors were chosen to round out the cast, including Stephen Root, Marin Ireland, and Ron Canada.
That's a great fucking name, by the way. It's like Ron Swanson's evil twin.
With a $16 million budget, filming began in fall 2016, with South Africa being transformed into small-town Missouri. Some additional filming was done on location in Missouri, in Chicago, and in Long Beach, California. Towards the end of production, Fox's executive vice president of production, Mark Roybal, left the studio. Roybal had championed the film and had been instrumental in getting it made.
Where are you going, buddy? It's not made yet.
Filming in South Africa had been financially savvy due to favorable exchange rates and tax rebates offered by the South African government, but those rebates came with deadlines for the movie's release, so Pryor was tasked with putting together a cut of the film almost immediately. His initial cut tested poorly, and the studio began panicking, so they hastily threw together their own 90-minute version of the film, which audiences liked even less.
With this movie, less is more. More confusing.
Pryor was given final cut privileges back and eventually turned in his version at a whopping 2 hours and 17 minutes. Also following production, Fox was purchased by Disney, and Disney was pretty unenthusiastic about releasing a bizarre 2-hour-plus R-rated horror movie. They agreed to release the movie under the 20th Century Fox banner, and it would end up being the final movie released under that imprint.
That's called going out with a toot.
Originally scheduled for an August 2020 release, the movie was delayed to December 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but was moved back up to October 23rd to fill a space left by the reshuffling of Death on the Nile. The marketing campaign for the film launched 1 week before release on October 16th, which gives you an idea of how invested Disney was in the film's success.
Disney did them cold, like Walt's frozen head.
They also declined to screen the film for critics, which is usually the sign of a low-quality movie. Recent horror movie flops centered around similarly named supernatural creepypasta figures like Slender Man and the Bye-Bye Man likely also poisoned audiences against The Empty Man, and it flopped hard, earning $1.3 million in its opening weekend and eventually making just $5 million total. The first wave of reviews were largely negative, and audiences also hated it, earning a D+ cinema score, with only 23% of viewers saying they would recommend the film to others. Certain critics like Adam Naiman and Chris Stuckman began championing the film, though, and once it was released on streaming, it developed a substantial cult fandom, with its popularity continuing to grow to this day.
Neither one of us had read the comic, but we both tried to take a peek at it to understand what he changed. And it does sound like he took quite a lot of license, which is part of the interesting story of how this came together. This is one of those kind of cynical Hollywood situations where Fox bought rights to all the IP from this comic book company, which good for them. They had become a successful comic imprint. And okay, look, we can go to Hollywood and sell all our properties to a big studio. So that worked out for them. And then Fox started calling directors like David Pryor and said, hey, here's some IP we have. Do you want to try to make a go with this one? And he said, yeah, fine. And then he just proceeded to take pieces of the idea and just shovel all his own shit into it, which is an interesting
That's a little bit of a harsher description than I would have went with. I think the stuff he added to it was pretty good. But yeah, he said, I had this idea for a scene. So I was just like, fuck, I'll just put it in The Empty Man. And some of it maybe didn't hold together in the final product as well as it could have.
I maybe shouldn't have used shoveling shit. It has negative connotations that I did not realize when it came out of my mouth. But
I can't imagine why. I mean, do you want to shovel shit?
He brought a bunch of stuff to it. And he talks about in this interview that you and I both listened to some of, he's like, oh yeah, I had this short story I had written 15 years before. So I like that. And I made that the prologue of the movie. I'm like, okay, that's a bold choice to just bring your own stuff into it. It's one of the cool parts of the movie. So we're not going to say that he fucked it up by doing that, but it made it a bigger challenge to craft a story that held together when he started from scratch and was kind of doing a grab bag. And the movie does kind of feel like a grab bag.
It does. I think this movie is really good. I like it a lot. But I think it works better as like a vibe than it does as like an A, B, C story.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a typical 3-act structure. It doesn't necessarily hold up in every way. And I know David Pryor has kind of addressed this with saying people are conditioned to watch movies in a certain way this day and look for plot holes and look for things that don't quite add up and view that as a flaw or some kind of oversight by the filmmaker. And maybe that's what they want. Maybe they want you to be disoriented and confused and not really understand how things work. But I do think that's a bit of a cop-out. If you're going to have twists in a movie, like the twist needs to make sense in retrospect. You might be able to say, yeah, this is just a vibe if it's kind of Lynchian, because Lynch doesn't really deal in twists. He just deals in affecting images that piece together a loose narrative. But this movie kind of hinges on a twist ending. And if that twist doesn't make sense when you go back through the movie, then I think it's ultimately not fully successful.
Yes, I would agree with that. We will try to pull some of that apart because the ending twists a whole bunch of stuff on you that I didn't even realize until the second watch. It goes really deep. And so we'll see how much sense we can make out of that. But But I'll tell you what I think was missing. And you can talk about audiences and go, oh, you're conditioned for this. And sure, people are more aware of movie technicalities.
We can thank CinemaSins for that. I put thank in quotes.
Yeah, like plot holes are a thing that, I don't know, that wasn't in the popular vocabulary even however many years back. But there is something I think that's at a more core level that I think people miss. I got this from somebody's screenwriting theory book, and that people, what they like about story, and one of the ways it appeals to us on a deep level, is that we want to guess what's going to happen next. When someone tells you a story, you get a feeling of, uh-oh, something went wrong. The hero has a problem. How are they going to solve it? What are they going to try? What might happen if they try this? Now they try something. What could happen next? And you don't necessarily want to be able to guess it easily, because then it feels like a cheap story that wasn't any fun. And you maybe don't want to be able to guess where it goes at all. But when it gets there, you want to be able to go, oh yeah, I should have seen that. Man, that's crazy, but I get it. And like you learn something from story. It goes back to the evolutionary purpose of story is to figure out life and how to handle situations. So like when that starts to fall apart, and this movie fell apart so much that I felt on first watch like he had actually taken out cause and effect, like things were just happening, but nothing was really causing the next thing to happen, which can happen in a mystery, right? It's a detective and he's just pawing through stuff and he finds one fact and he finds out another thing and someone dies, but they don't lead one to another. But it broke down so much that I'm like, I'm missing the key underpinnings of story. On the second watch, I got a little more of it and I understood more what technically occurred in the film, which some of which is subtle to pick up on. So I got more satisfaction, but it is a real challenge. You push it that hard.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And if it sounds like we're being nitpicky or pulling it apart, I think we just need to kind of lay the groundwork for why it might be tough for us to explain the plot of this movie in a way that makes sense to people who haven't seen it. Because I know we definitely have listeners that don't always watch the movies we're talking about,
Sure.
and they kind of rely on us to shepherd them through the story. And this is going to be a tricky one. So we're kind of laying the groundwork that, yeah, it doesn't all necessarily make sense, but it's still relatively enjoyable.
Well, we're going to try to, as we always do, explain to you exactly what happens in this movie the best we can. If we get it wrong, give us a break this time, because it's really hard to figure out sometimes what the heck's going on.
Yeah, you want to walk us through the first leg of the movie?
All right.
This is kind of like Act 1 and 2 in a sense.
Yeah, because there's a major prologue and then it has a lot what we put in the first act here. Here we go. Two young couples are trekking in the Himalayas in Bhutan when one of the guys, named Paul, blows on a bone flute, after which he stumbles into a cave and becomes entranced by the many-armed skeleton of an ancient monster. His friends pull him out of the cave, but over the next 3 days, as they shelter from a storm, they're menaced by a dark-robed figure. Finally, as the still catatonic Paul meditates by a bridge, his girlfriend kills the other couple and then takes her own life. A couple decades later, ex-cop James Lasombra, played by James Badge Dale, is mourning his wife and son who died in a car crash a year before. One day, a neighbor and friend, and possibly a former lover named Nora, asks James to help locate her teenage daughter, Amanda. Nora is freaking out because Amanda packed and disappeared in the night, leaving a message on her mirror written in blood. The empty man made me do it.
Let's talk about this opening. It's pretty bombastic to have a 20-minute prologue that doesn't immediately necessarily tie into the rest of the movie at all.
As a lot of people do when they flip this on, you do a little double check. Did I start the right movie? This is
not
not
the thing.
Yeah, but it's cool. Himalayas are cool. I love the setting. Gets pretty quickly to this real spooky situation with this skeleton in a cave.
Let's talk about the skeleton. He's got too many fingers and he's bigger than he should be, right? He's twice the size of a human skeleton.
It's pretty big. He's got like a ton of arms. They're kind of start to be embedded in the rock behind him, but I got this impression of a god with many arms spiraling out in a fan behind him. It's very creepy.
Well done. I guess they just 3D printed it and then brought it to set and put it together the day of filming, which is pretty cool. If you Google The Empty Man, I feel like this picture comes up pretty soon in the results. So even if you're not going to watch the movie, just look at the skeleton. It's pretty fucking cool. Nice acting from this Aaron Poole gentleman. He has to do a lot without being able to say much or move around at all. So his face has to be really evocative, and you called it out, but he's kind of sitting there cross-legged and just like tears streaming down his face and like quietly freaking out, but he's perfectly still. It's a very tough acting job, I have to imagine.
Yeah, it's really good. Aaron Poole, not Aaron Paul, although he plays a character named Paul, and he wears
a beanie hat, just like Aaron Paul does.
He looks a lot like Aaron Paul, man. It's a funny coincidence.
The Empty Man, bitch. Sorry, that's my Jesse Pinkman impression.
Yeah, he's really good. He says very few lines. Some of the few lines he does say, he whispers in the tiniest little whisper, including, "If you touch me, you'll die," which is fucking scary when he says it. It feels like like it's a clue to the rules. This is the first supernatural thing we're seeing in this movie. You run into an ancient demon god monster thing, and then if you touch him, you will die. And it sounds like, oh, that's the kind of like catchphrase that a horror movie would have, and that would be the rules of the mythology. Not at all. That's random. Like he said that because he felt bad about spreading this thing, but that's kind of not the rules of anything else in this movie. It's just a kind of a cool line he got to say.
Also, the rules of the rules in this movie are kind of not the rules in this movie, because like people play fast and loose with these throughout. We haven't really come up on it yet, but as we dig into the backstory, there's like, oh, you got to be on a bridge. It's got to be night. You got to blow into a thing. You got to say this name. You got to
think about it.
The Empty Man's got a lot of fucking rules. And that is another reason it plays heavily into Bloody Mary or Candyman.
Right.
Even Beetlejuice, the Bye-Bye Man, the Slend. Like all these things are like, oh, you have to kind of activate it in a certain way, which is kind of like a lame trope at this point. It's kind of been done to death. But I think the movie is kind of misleading you with those rules too.
I started actually wondering if Pryor was being cynical about stuff and thumbing his nose at it, but he does it pretty earnestly. There's no winking in this section. And on top of that, like you said, it is this sort of like childlike urban legends rules to the game. And then when you see that, I guess we would call him the Empty Man. I'm not sure if the Empty Man is the hooded guy or the guy who is the vessel for the hooded guy. But in any case, we see what we might call the Empty Man, which is a guy in a scary, shredded black hooded thing. And he plays this weird childlike stepping game with people, which comes back later in the movie.
Oh, it's so creepy though. I love it.
It's super creepy, but it's like from another genre where the villains are wickedly humorous and fuck with you. So this thing is an ancient god, yet it also kind of fucks with you in this childlike way.
It very explicitly fucks with you in a way that it doesn't need to by the whole like drawn out 3-day process that goes into, because every time, like even in the intro sequence in the Himalayas, this is going to be super confusing for people because I think we're jumping around, but you know, it starts like day 1, day 2, day 3, and then shit hits the fan on day 3. That's another thing we've seen in The Ring and in a lot of like J-horror stuff. So I feel like they try to explain it by saying like he's basically a fear vampire, which is also like another trope that's been around. He kind of needs people to suffer and be anxious and be afraid before he kills them, because that's how he kind of feeds. They don't use that terminology, but that's kind of hinted at.
It's hinted at, and they do get into a bunch of philosophy in the second and third act when we meet the cult that is trying to encourage this demon to take over more power in the world. And there's a bunch of nihilism and nothing matters. And I guess that kind of goes with it's trying to destroy people's minds. It's trying to spread by infecting more people's minds. And so there's stuff about repetition in their philosophy. And so we're in one of those places where maybe we're being charitable and trying to tie up threads that the writer-director didn't totally necessarily tie up himself. But if you're feeling that way, you can kind of like, oh, it kind of makes sense that like he has to spread into people's minds. And so he has these ways of getting in your head.
I did really like that Stephen Root speech. What does he say? Anything becomes gibberish if you repeat it. So what has the real power, the repetition or the gibberish? You know, like it's hard to remember exactly what he says, but then that kind of ties, it doesn't kind of, it directly, we see these very ominous shots of like people whispering into people's ears and we can't hear what they're saying. And that, you know, Stephen Root kind of explains the movie to us at one point, but also doesn't explain anything. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting movie. It's so hard to talk about though, because it's so bizarre.
It's super hard. And it's got this theme of nihilism because of the cult's whole idea, like you're talking about, Stephen Root talks about, is like nothing is real, nothing matters. And that seeps into the storytelling. It's not only in the content of the story, but it's in the form of the story. So we're going to give you all these examples of where like he has a rule, but he doesn't really have a rule because nothing matters. And it's kind of like this kind of movie, but it's not really that movie because nothing matters. And so as long as you kind of go along with that philosophy, you can roll with these punches.
Sure. That's a good way to put it. All right. So let's talk about, I guess we meet James and Amanda almost at the same time.
Yeah.
They're having a conversation on a bench. Amanda is the young girl that goes missing. When I first was watching this, I was like, she's kind of giving a weird wooden performance. And I know this actor and I like this actor. So I know she's capable of giving a better performance. But then it makes sense the further you go down the storyline. She's talking to James about what we eventually learn is Pontifex cult. And she's just being cryptic and weird in the way people are in this movie.
It's passable at that point as though she's just a teenager who read some weird philosophy shit and she's trying to sell it on her older friend who lives next door. But she is weird about it. And we later learn that she's a hardcore cultist and she's actually a little more serious about all this stuff than she lets on. But what's interesting to me is that she's pitching her shit at him. And actually what turns out to be a nice performance from him and from her by the end of the scene, they both crack into a smile. She's spewing all this philosophical BS at him. And they kind of both laugh at it in this really warm way. And it's actually maybe the warmest human moment in the whole movie, because otherwise the movie is pretty grim.
There's not a lot of people laughing in this movie. It's an incredibly bleak film. So it's a nice little release. But again, it comes pretty early on and then we don't get much more.
And you don't know what to make of it at that point. And then, it gets dark from there.
So let's talk about James La Sombra a little bit. As an Overwatch player, I knew that Sombra is Spanish for shadow.
Yes.
So he's James the Shadow. Maybe some foreshadowing there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to shout out this really nice drone shot of him jogging when we first meet him. Tree-lined street. He's running right down the center of the road, which I wouldn't really recommend, but it seems sleepy enough. And I wanted to single it out because I'm going to shit on another drone shot later on. And I just wanted to be fair when he arrives at the camp.
Okay. I might have to argue with you on that one, but let's leave that till we get to the camp.
Just the CGI isn't very good. So like you could tell it was all made like CGI and they didn't have the budget for it really. So we meet him, his first time we see him without Amanda, he's getting drunk at what looks like a Chili's or something along those lines, like a theme restaurant, a chain.
Yeah. El Torito or something.
He's drinking shots at his like booth table. And I don't know what it is, but having a waitress bring shots to a booth is a really sad thing to me.
I didn't think about that, but yes.
Because you usually see a booth at a family restaurant and just getting a couple shots delivered just feels weird. Shots are for the bar.
That's fair. If you were there with friends, then it would be excusable. As long
I still don't think it's okay. No, you got to go to the bar. Or like a bar table, something that's a little higher. It's got stools, not a booth.
Is shots at the table worse than hogging all the fully loaded nachos?
They have rules. You can't just hog all the fully loaded nachos. So they should have a rule about no shots in a booth.
The bartender will definitely come over and tell you both those rules. Shots are for the bar, and one person is not allowed to hog all the fully loaded nachos.
What?
But James was alone for dinner, so he got to eat all the nachos by himself. It was his birthday. Another little comedic moment. They come and sing him happy birthday, and he's embarrassed, and it's really awkward.
They really front-loaded all the humor into the first act of this movie. If you even call these humor, like it's an embarrassing moment for everyone, but it's cringe humor, so that's still humor. And then Amanda's disappearance, well done. Like you said, blood scrawls on a mirror are always creepy. We all saw Black Swan. We know this stuff works. It's popular for a reason.
Not cool. Yeah. And then she has a bunch of other shit that they dig up in her room. She's been writing weird shit in her notebooks and drawing pictures.
And outside of that intro, like all this feels very standard for this type of movie that we maybe thought we were getting into, right? The weird drawings and writings that all tracks with a boogeyman, urban legend, creepypasta, teen slasher movie.
And it's a solid setup for what it also is, which is a sort of noir detective movie, because it's this bummed out ex-cop who gets pulled in for personal reasons to a missing persons case for a young lady that he has a dangerous emotional connection to her mom. So it's loaded with all those kind of classic detective story stuff too.
Yeah, and actually that's why I think the middle of the movie is my favorite part, because it's him really doing like the noir detective stuff. We get a great Wikipedia scene. I'm a sucker for a good Wikipedia scene where we just like Google things along with the protagonist and learn with him. You know, I like learning.
This one's nicely done.
Yeah, really well done. So let me talk about that middle section a little bit. Are you ready?
Yeah, tell us what happens next.
James La Sombra is on the case trying to track down Amanda. He talks to Amanda's school friend Devara and finds out that along with a few other pals, they had recently sat on a bridge and blown into a bottle. I'm sorry, that just sounds funny because it's not dramatic at all. Which legend says will cause the empty man to visit you over the following 3 days. Devara is already freaking out thinking she sees a hooded figure, and that night the empty man comes and kills her, causing her to stab her own eye out. James goes to check out the bridge in question and finds all the remaining friends hanging dead from beneath it. And once again, the empty man made me do it is written on the wall. James finds a bottle on the bridge and blows on it, after which he begins to feel stalked by the empty man himself. He remembers Amanda had a flyer for a place called the Pontifex Institute, so James goes there to investigate. He listens while their leader, Arthur Parsons, played by Stephen Root, preaches an arcane philosophy about emptiness and meaning. Then James sneaks off into the basement where he finds the members doing creepy cult-like incantations. When they kick him out of the building, one young member named Garrett clues James in on a secret. Amanda has been selected for advanced training and taken to a Pontifex camp in the woods.
This is some straight up detective guy following clues, getting himself deeper into something, discovering dead bodies. It's good stuff.
It is. And James Badgedale, like I said, he must have a cop's face because I feel like everyone first met him in The Departed playing a cop. The Standoff at Sparrow Creek, he plays a cop. With another movie he's co-starred in with our boy Robert Aramayo, who's in this one.
Okay.
Yeah, he's just got a knack for this detective work. He's just got the look and the demeanor, I guess, sensibility to really get after it. And he's very believable.
The reason that this section might get awkward is that the teenagers are almost centered in this section. So there's some tension like, wait, is he the protagonist? Or is this going to become a teen slasher movie for a minute or a teen boogeyman movie? They do spend a lot of time. One of the first things he does is talk to Devara, and she goes, oh yeah, we did something on the bridge. And then it flashes back. And that scene, that's like a full 10, 12 minutes of kids acting out a boogeyman boogeyman movie where they're summoning an evil spirit.
The first time I watched that scene, I was like, it's hard for me to feel bad for these kids because you're like, oh, if you do this bad thing will happen. And then they all do the bad thing. And they're like, oh no, bad things are happening now. But then when you watch it in retrospect, you're like, oh, Amanda is clearly really pushing them to do this thing because she's got an agenda.
I felt sympathetic to Amanda in this part of the movie, but later you realize she's fully on board. She's already bucking for second tier Pontifex grade. And so she's manipulating her friends to basically get them all killed.
And we see her whispering into, I think his name was Brandon, one of the boys' ears at the mall, which is the same thing we saw Paul doing to his girlfriend, which later caused her to kill herself and her two other friends.
Yeah.
So it seems like if you see somebody doing the whispers, they're kind of like the vessel for the empty man and not necessarily a future victim.
Right.
It becomes a tip off that she's a little something else.
It takes a minute to sort her out between being a victim or the perpetrator. But then we spent time with Devara, which is, again, the movie is like going in a direction. I didn't expect there to be boobies in this movie. And yet all of a sudden there's a teen girl and she's alone in a spa and she's dropping her robe and getting into a steam room.
What's she doing in the spa?
Yeah, what is she doing? Her friends are all missing or dead.
Yeah. If weird, creepy, supernatural, borderline stuff is happening to me, I'm not going to sit alone in the steam room and have myself a schwitz. I'm going to be like, I want to hang out with everyone I know. I'll be like, get me in a room with all of my friends and family. Just odd choices being made here. And yeah, this scene is weird. The way she dies is probably the most violent scene in the movie, I would say, right?
Yeah.
There's really not much violence in this movie, really.
Yeah, so it's not only satisfying the sex part of teen slasher movies, it's satisfying the violence part. I guess the couples, there's a little bit of stabbing with a knife at the beginning.
Pretty bloodless, though. This one is a little more, it lingers on it a little bit longer.
Yeah, so I'm like, is Pryor enjoying this? Is he like, yes, this is a good thing about slasher movies and we take the pretty girl and we stab her in the eye and we revel in that violence of that for a minute? Or is he saying, get your fill because this is the last you're going to see of conventional horror?
I feel like it's more likely the latter, just based on knowing the guy, and he seems to be a real student of film. I certainly think he's aware when he's participating in a trope. He seemed to have lofty enough goals for this movie that he would go out of his way to try to undercut them.
Yeah.
But if we're asking the question, is it really successful?
Exactly. You know? If he's undercutting it, he's undercutting it in the most subtle way. Even the fact that the empty man is a creepy creature in a shaggy robe, like it didn't have to be that. It's for the meat of the movie, it's a conceptual horror. It's almost like an intellectual horror that doesn't even need this physical manifestation that grabs a pair of scissors and stabs you in the face.
Also, the body we get of the empty man doesn't necessarily match the skeleton we saw. So it's like, where did he come from? What is his deal? Who is he?
In the very end, I paused some of the very last moments of transformation, and there's an explanation for that visually, that he's like this cave skeleton inside of a costume as a robed humanoid, for whatever that's worth. That's my theory. But
I'm on board. Fuck it. Who cares? This is not a movie that you want to nitpick necessarily. You'll enjoy it a lot more if you don't. So I'm just going to move on.
Yeah.
But then James does the empty man test and it's not nighttime. No, I'm kidding, because I just said I'm not going to nitpick things. But
yeah. Want to take us to the bridge? Where's that confounded bridge?
Go ahead, girl. The bridge is cool, though. It's a cool set or location. It's not a set, but it's very cool. It's a real bridge in Missouri. It's got a name.
Yeah. Rock Chain or Chain Rock.
Chain of Rocks.
Yeah. That's one of the few locations they actually did in the U.S. It happened to be location appropriate for the Missouri setting of the movie.
I will say, though, being set in South Africa did not stand out to me at all. I thought it looked like Middle America well enough. I did not have any issue with the South African setting standing in for Missouri for the most part. There wasn't really anything that jumped out as being weirdly out of place.
They kind of didn't lose anything. And I think he said in one point in one of the interviews that when they needed to show a small town USA street, that's what they did in the US. And so they got a few exteriors in the can, and then the rest of it was on stages or in the park. A lot of it is in the camp in the next section.
A camp which you might recognize from another Blast Zone episode.
They shared that park location with episode 46, The Dark Tower, Nikolai Arcel movie shot by Rasmus Wiedbeck.
It's a fun tidbit.
So James blows into the bottle, which you're kind of like yelling at him, like, fuck would you do that? But come to find out, it probably wouldn't have mattered either way because they had grand plans for him regardless.
And he's so nihilistic about his own life at this point. And he kind of gives you that expression. He picks up the bottle. He doesn't really shrug his shoulders, but you almost feel like he's shrugging his shoulders like, oh, well, fuck it.
I did notice that he throws the bottle after that, and you don't hear it. You don't hear it land. It doesn't break. It doesn't roll.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, is that a gaffe, or it feels like an intentional choice, knowing how detailed oriented the movie is in a lot of ways?
That's a good question. I just assumed it was so far off and it splashed down somewhere where we wouldn't hear hear it.
Maybe. All right, so let's talk about Pontifex, because now we're getting into the meat of the real story, what's going on here. Creepy doomsday cult. Love a creepy doomsday cult.
Yeah.
And this is where we get the Wikipedia thing, because he finds the Pontifex breadcrumb trail from Amanda that she clearly planted on purpose, but we didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
So you called this out. The Wikipedia scene is definitely cribbing from another movie.
Yeah, when I saw it, I'm like, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo has scenes, both main characters in that movie spending a lot of time on computers doing research and looking up close at screens. Was that like a direct thing, or is that just like so generic that could be anything?
It's kind of popular now, but it's hard not to see the connection there considering who directed The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. That's his boy. He's a longtime collaborator and student of Fincher.
Yeah.
I don't want to say student, not literally. You assume he picked up some tricks from him, watching
sure.
him work. Yeah, so it's hard not to think that was kind of an homage.
And like you said, it's really well executed. The graphics are excellent. Like just the crispness of the fonts on screen is pleasing to look at. And there's a ton of little clues and information and
tulpas and yeah. And it can't be easy, honestly, to make it easy for the audience to read the words on the website. I feel like that's kind of an underratedly difficult thing to do. How long do you linger on one shot? Like how close do you get into the letters?
Yeah, it's not reading you across the page and giving you full sentences. It's kind of zooming in and you can get a little snippet here and there. It's expertly done so that what you do pick up is fun and you go, oh, that's the place he was. And oh, yeah, it's a satisfying scene.
It's a trope I actually enjoy. The Outsider, the Stephen King show, which also kind of shares like a little bit of a style. Like there's a lot of The Outsider in The Empty Man, I would say. They have a little bit of a twinship.
Yes, I see what you mean.
There's some really good Wikipedia scenes in The Outsider as well.
Nice.
All right, so then he gets to the Institute, this fucking cavernous building that they've bought. How large is this place? It seems like a compound. It's not even a building.
It's huge. It's like a building that takes up a whole city block. And it's not only big like in the main floors, it goes floor after floor deeper and deeper because he goes down who knows how many sets of stairs after he exits the main reception hall there.
So we're getting a vibe that this place has resources. They've got big money going into the location and this cult, although institute, let's say institute, they're not a cult. It's pretty cool, the stuff he finds. Cool is not the right word. Startling, concerning. Cults usually have a charismatic leader. I guess you could say that Stephen Root is playing that charismatic leader. He seems like the head honcho here.
He's doing the master thing and he's given a speech in this ornate wooden lecture hall that's also in a really impressive space. And he just, like we hinted at earlier, he talks you around in a circle where it's like, oh, I almost followed what he said and it almost kind of made sense. And then he lost me. But I
rewound it like 3 times just to be like, all right, so now he's saying this. What is he? And then I was like, okay, wait, no, I lost it again. I might just not be smart enough for this speech.
It is well written. So this is where you go, okay, if this doesn't come from the comic book and David Pryor just wrote the speech from scratch, then you got to give him points because it's written to basically to lose you at the edge of sense and madness. And it does a nice job with that.
He quotes Nietzsche, you stare into an abyss, the abyss stares back at you, but kind of flips that whole cliche on its head because that's such a common saying, but I don't think people really consider what it means. And that's kind of what he's playing with.
He wants you to rethink it. And it is good. At this point in the movie, you start to be able to go, oh, okay, that does seem to relate to what's going on and what this horror is that he's up against.
But James has no time for any of these shenanigans because he grew up in San Francisco. He's used to all this hippy dippy nonsense. He doesn't want to hear it.
The guy grew up in San Francisco. Give him a break. He lets us know. No fewer than 3 times. Might have been more. I lost count.
I think it's 4. I think I counted as 4. He mentions that he grew up in San Francisco. But also another Stephen Root addition to this movie. It's been a few weeks without one, but now we get our Justified crossover of the week.
Justified crossover of the week.
Oh, shit.
Stephen Root had a recurring role on Justified as Mike the Hammer Reardon, a judge who was known for carrying a gun because he gave out such hard sentences. People are always trying to kill him.
Oh, cool.
And also wearing a Speedo under his robes and nothing else.
I can totally see Stephen Root. It's perfect for that.
He's great in it. Another reason to go watch Justified. He's got an arc that lasts maybe 2 episodes in one season, but then he gets sprinkled in throughout probably whenever he was available. So you never have to go too long without a little Mike Reardon appearance.
Yeah, he's such a fun guy to have around Hollywood. And he's great. He livens up this movie. It's a great addition.
Killing it on Barry, by the way. He's great on Barry.
Oh my God, so good.
And then another actor we've been kind of talking about a lot recently, Robert Aramayo, who's been playing Elrond on The Rings of Power. Also played young Ned Stark on Game of Thrones. And like I said, I just checked out the standoff at Sparrow Creek, a movie I checked out because it had James Badgedale and Robert Aramayo in it. And it's a pretty good little crime movie.
Cool.
Check it out if you're into that stuff. It only came out in 2018, maybe? It's an hour and 28 minutes. You can't go wrong. But he's great in this, playing like a wannabe.
Like a beatnik? Who's the guy? Neil Cassidy. So James
keeps calling him Neil.
Yeah, keeps going, I don't need the Neil Cassidy act. I grew up in San Francisco. And I'm like, I got to look up Neil Cassidy. I guess he was some kind of beat poet type of personality. But he's fun in this.
Yeah.
You know, no hint of his British accent. He actually pulls off a nice American accent. Fine acting.
Now, you know what? I get the sense that he's like an accent guy because he does a bang up accent trying to do Sean Bean's accent on Game of Thrones. And then you hear him as Elrond and he's got like a very Hugo Weaving affectation. So it seems like he's a voice guy. He's skilled at masking his real accent. I couldn't even tell you how he actually sounds.
Yeah, I haven't heard him in an interview, but I do believe he's UK born and raised.
Never seen him be anything less than stellar in a role. I think he's going to go places. He's pretty cool. He's played a lot of different types of characters, which is tough, and kind of excelled at all of them. Yeah, this is just a little section where we give props to Robert Aramayo.
Star on the Rise. It's a new segment.
I bought some stock. Did you want to get into your logical concerns with this section that you brought up right before? Because this is kind of where some of that weird time nonsense happens, right?
Let's come back to it at the end, but let's establish that while James is here, he watches this lecture, Stephen Root goes off, and then he sneaks off and he goes into these basement levels, and he gets to the lowest level, and he has this weird encounter with a group that's trying to summon the empty man, and they're saying, show yourself, and he's kind of sneaking around, so he's not trying to show himself, and he's standing on this catwalk, and then he hears something below him, but he can't see what it is, and at that point, the security guards come in, and they roust him out of the place. But that's going to come back later, so we'll talk about what else happened in that scene when we find out at the end of the movie.
Oh, yeah, because I guess you don't see it yet, so it's hard to talk about it.
Yeah, you don't know, and it's too much to try to open that can of worms right now.
Okay, let's walk through the ending.
All right, taking us home.
I changed my mind. This is my favorite section just because of the camp. I love this camp sequence so much.
This is cool. James arrives at the Pontifex camp in the woods and proceeds to break into some unoccupied cabins. There, he finds files on Amanda, her friends, and himself. He also watches videotapes of some creepy cult rituals. Then he goes outside and he sees the creepiest ritual of all, a group of several dozen cultists marching in lockstep around a towering fire. Then they turn on James and they chase him back to his car and he barely escapes. The next day, James follows Garrett to a hospital where he beats a confession out of him. He learns that inside the hospital is a comatose man who turns out to be none other than Paul the hiker from Bhutan, who has been serving as conduit for the empty man's power for decades. At Paul's bedside, James finds Amanda, who has a startling revelation for him. James isn't a real person, and his memories are fake. He was manifested into existence by the cultists to serve as their new vessel. James has a vision where the empty man enters his body and takes him over. Then he kills Paul, and he becomes the new vessel, and the cultists drop to their knees and bow before him.
Man, let's talk about the camp. I feel like this sequence is the one people talk about when they're like, the empty man is really good. It comes up a lot, particularly the kind of cat and mouse game they play with all these, but we'll talk about that when we get there. So you shouted out the same shot that I was calling out for being bad as a bonus.
I put cool shot in the notes, and John's like, wait till I get to this section and trash the shit out of this shot.
I think like his ambition outran his budget in this scene, let's just say.
Maybe I wasn't looking at the screen big enough or close enough to notice.
Did you watch this on your iPad, Ian?
I watched it on the 14-inch MacBook Pro with a Retina display. So it was like good quality. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't blown up.
I watched it on a 75-inch Ultra HD TV.
Yeah, it wasn't that level. And yeah, so what we're talking about is kind of a gratuitous filmmaking flourish, right? The guy's got a map to the national park. He throws it down on the seat of his car next to him. Camera zooms in on it, and then it pivots and turns into the actual forest road that he's driving on. And the lines and the place names on the map fade into dark gaps between the trees. And I just kind of liked that about it. I just thought it was neat, but it was kind of gratuitous.
It was definitely him putting his filmmaker dick out on the table for all of us to see. But again, I really like the idea, the execution. I understand why you want to do these things. You got $16 million. It's not a ton of money.
No, it's not a ton. And the movie is pretty deluxe overall. So yeah, he was stretching it here.
Great production, but he really stretches that dollar. And that's why the studio wanted him to film in South Africa, is because $16 million goes a lot further there than it does anywhere else. But you could see it. Like, I would have guessed $30 to $40 million budget for this movie just based on the production value.
Yeah, totally could have been that.
But all right, so that he gets to the camp, he's investigating, going through rooms. He notices that they've got files on all the dead kids. They've got a file with his name on it, but it's empty. And it's also red. It's different than the other ones, which feels important.
Yeah, it seems like something.
There's a creepy bear, real creepy bear.
Oh yeah, is that where he first sees the teddy bear?
Does he? Yes, he does see it. It's propped up against a bed, but then it's not there when he turns around.
And then later they drop it off at his house.
Yeah, so they're taunting him with the bear a little bit.
So I have to say that I loved the shot gets you into the sequence, and I love the end. We're going to get to that because that's where it really gets cool. The part where he's going through consecutive empty cabins and just kind of poking through clues, I got impatient with this, and I could take a little bit of the blame because I've had a phenomenon that I'm calling jump scare crabbiness, which is when you're watching a horror movie and you're expecting it to scare the shit out of you with a lot of action. So I'm like keyed up, and it doesn't, you get kind of crabby. And that's the mood I was in, especially on the first watch of this. Totally different on the second and watch. But I was like, you're in a fucking abandoned cabin and you're looking at creepier and creepier stuff, right? He goes, the first cabin is just kind of boring clues. I'm like, okay, you just spent 5 minutes in a darkened place pointing a flashlight at files. And I'm like, okay, we got some
Broken
files.
bottles.
Yeah, it's like, we got some files. We learned one fact. Pontifex keeps files on people. And he goes to a second cabin. He's like, oh, videotapes. And he starts watching them on an old TV. And the content of the tapes is super creepy. But again, now we're in another genre of movie of found footage video.
Could we describe the content of the tapes a little bit for the listeners?
Oh, God, we could try.
There's like a person in great distress kind of being conditioned, I guess you would say, almost like in a Clockwork Orange type of way, like exposure therapy. And they seem to be doing some kind of, not necessarily experiments, but I guess psychological experiments on them.
They're chanting, and whoever this person is totally fucked up. Their eyes are glowing, but you can't tell if it's from the lighting in the bad video or they're really like have glowing eyes.
Could be a flashlight attached to the camera or something. But yeah, their eyes are all weird. They seem to be in great distress.
And then they seem to be picking their side of their abdomen open. Is that what's going on? Is that blood and guts?
It's kind of what it looks like. It's pretty gross.
It's black and white and it's grainy.
Seemed like innards. It's not cool.
Thank God it was grainy. And then he's painting on the wall with his own innards.
Not pleasant.
No.
I will say I did shout this movie out for not being very violent. It's also not very jump scary, which might have been what threw you off. But it's 3 movies in a row now we've done that don't really employ jump scares. There's maybe 2 in this movie, but they're pretty well done. There's one that I thought was kind of cheap, but the rest of them are pretty good.
Yeah, there's not a lot. So folks, if you're like me, it's really good to know that going in, because otherwise you waste a lot of time feeling upset, feeling worried about the jump scares coming, and then feeling aggravated that they haven't come and the tension is never broken.
Right. Don't have the jump scare crabbies like Ian did.
Yeah.
That's no way to go through life.
It's tough.
He leaves that cabin after seeing the videotapes and comes upon a scene that I frankly cannot believe he missed earlier because it's pretty notable. There is a large fire, a large bonfire, and a couple hundred cultists, maybe like 200-300.
It was a lot of them. It was a lot.
Maybe like 60. I don't know, but it's a lot. They're just kind of sprinting in a circle around it, and the fire seems to be responding to them. They're chanting, singing, whatever you want to call it. The fire seems to be growing as they chant. It grows to like an impossible degree for one shot that is maybe in James's head, or maybe is hinting at the larger mystical forces at play.
Yes, this is where like a minute ago, it was found footage horror, and now we're in full on cosmic horror because this fire is going up to the stars and the stars are spinning and he's kind of blacking out. There's clues that he's kind of maybe lost consciousness for a little while there because he looks at the stars for a minute and then they're spinning and then he looks back down and the scene has kind of changed on him.
So he's trying to get a closer look, but maybe sets off the cultists to his arrival because they seem to be kind of tracking him now. And this is the scene that is just awesome, even out of context. Like I watched it again. I watched the movie twice and I watched this scene a third time just because I really like it. But they're all just kind of sitting there staring at him, and he takes a step back and they all take a step forward, which we know is one of the Empty Man's little games he likes to play.
Yeah, Empty Man dance game.
But it's like 60 people doing it all in lockstep, and then he takes one more step back and they take another step forward. And that's another moment we singled out as maybe one of the attempts at humor. He just goes, yeah, no, and starts sprinting away, and they all start running as one. And their synchronicity, I think, is what makes it so creepy, that they're all moving as one organism.
It's super cool. And I was already going to shout this out as kind of having a contemporary elevated horror feel and evoking an Ari Aster or a Jordan Peele. And then he basically pulls a Nope, a comedy moment in the scene. But did you feel like that was where it got us into the elevated horror territory?
Yeah, you could definitely see, I would say, the influence of Midsommar, but The Empty Man was actually finished earlier than Midsommar was, even though it was released later. But yeah, the burning pyre and the dancing around it did. But also, a lot of this movie reminds me of Hereditary. Not to spoil Hereditary, but cults do factor into it. Some of the iconography in here seems similar, but certainly I think Pryor is pulling from his own influences more so than anything like that. It did definitely evoke, like you said, that idea of elevated horror, which has become popular. And he shouted out his production designer. He got the idea to hire him from watching The Witch, another elevated horror from Robert Eggers.
Nice.
So yeah, he's clearly tuned into what is critically successful in horror in this current era.
Yeah, and this scene, to me, it's not so much that he's cribbing from them, but this scene would please fans of that stuff because it fits in that style. It's high concept, set piece shit that fucks with your head, and it works great.
Also, I think a lack of jump scares has become kind of a hallmark of a better class of filmmaker trying to attack the horror genre. Like Aster, Peele, they don't really use jump scares to that degree. Or certainly Eggers. I don't think The Witch has any jump scares. I feel like jump scares have become, like, I don't want to just say jump scares are useless and have no place in horror movies. I just think they became kind of a shortcut for maybe less talented filmmakers for a while there, and they were just so rampant that it became fatiguing to watch a horror movie, especially in a movie theater where everything's so loud.
Jump scares are like the auto-tune of horror movies. Like, they were fun and you got into them for a while. Be like, okay, let's hear somebody do it the old-fashioned way.
And I think the scares that really stay with you are the ones that are built on a foundation of something a little more substantial.
Not just, turning a corner and something screeches in your face.
So he gets some information on the hospital. How does he find out about the hospital? From following Garrett.
Yeah, he's casing the Pontifex Institute, and 7 or 9 Pontifex kids get into one Cadillac and drive to the hospital, which is maybe another comedy moment.
The fucking Scooby-Doo gang. Yeah.
I'm not sure what that was. That was maybe a subtle comedic element. This car, he's following it around. It picks up a few people, then it picks up a few more, then it picks up a few more. And when they get out at the hospital, the back seat is stuffed, and 2 of the kids have actually had to hitch a ride in the trunk. And it's not explained, and it doesn't make any sense, but it's kind of funny.
Yeah, we've seen how much money they have to own that building. You can afford a minivan, I'm sure, but whatever. So Garrett had kind of been playing him and trying to play off like he wasn't really into the cult and was playing both sides essentially. Yeah. But he finds out that no, he was setting James up the entire time, and he essentially beats a confession out of him about what's really going on to some degree. I don't think Garrett's is tuned in to all the high level secrets, but he lets go that everything is not quite as it seems. I thought he was going to shoot him there, but he doesn't. He just kind of leaves him in the parking lot.
Yeah, I was ready for him to shoot him because he threatens him with a gun to the head, and then instead of killing him, he punches him a couple times. But it would have been interesting. I mean, that would have been really dark for the character to go at that point. Now, the character goes darker than you ever thought he was going to go 10 minutes later, but not in that particular parking lot.
Maybe it's not exactly that character by then, but who knows? So then we go back to the hospital, right?
Yeah, because after he finds out from Garrett, he rushes back to the Pontifex Institute, apparently, breaks in again, opens more files, finds his red file again, but this time it's full of stuff, okay?
Yeah.
And now
newspaper clippings and pictures and all types of information.
Yes, all of which are clues to something that we don't know is happening yet. So maybe, should we run through the end before we try to unpack what
let's get to
there?
the end, and then we'll go circle back around and try to make it make sense as best we can. So then he goes back to the hospital now because he gets some information in those files, I think, about...
There's more hospital info, and that's Paul and his medical history.
And he talks to the most sinister nurse. She's just ready to give him all the facts. She's like the security guard in Wayne's World. He's wow, that is an alarming amount of information. What a helpful security guard. This nurse has all the facts.
Yeah, she starts out by saying, well, I can't possibly tell you anything because of patient privacy. And then she proceeds to just fucking dish to him. And by the way, this and that and the other. And like, she gets more and more kind of creepy. And you're like, wait a minute. Is she a cultist? Is she setting him up to...
She knows, like, first he was at this hospital, but then he moved to this hospital and he came here a few months ago. And it's like, so you must be in the cult. No nurse would memorize this guy's fucking life story like this.
And then, the camera gets closer and closer on her face. She was a fun character. She has 2 minutes in the movie, but I'm like, I like the nurse.
She kills it. But she also drops he sure does get a lot of visitors, and one of them's in there right now. And then we go in there and find Amanda trimming his beard and hair. And then that's when Amanda drops the bomb.
Yeah, a big bomb. Very
confusing bomb.
It's a Sixth Sense level kind of thing. You're not real. You're not who you thought you were. We just made you up. And you're like, holy shit. And then you're ready for the Shyamalan flashback where it runs you through all the scenes and says, remember in this scene where he did that? Or that explains
or why. Fight Club did that famously. And Fight Club was the movie that Pryor kind of broke into Hollywood with. That was his big break, doing the behind the scenes
features for that. Yeah. But you know what? That doesn't happen in this movie.
Nope.
It does not connect. There is no rushing back and going, oh my God, I can't believe it. I should have known, because you shouldn't have known. Everything that happens, like he calls his friend Nora and she's like, you must have a wrong number. I don't know anybody named James. And you're like, no, that's not true.
She brought you Chinese food 2 days ago. Like you were in her house.
You were in her house. And not only that, you go, okay, maybe that was a different person. But there's another scene where he calls her and talks to her. Like, so it's the same number on the phone. The stuff doesn't add up.
The cops, you get the sense that he drank himself off the job after his wife and son die. But then another cop is like, weren't you a cop in St. Louis? I remember reading about you. It's like, who the fuck was that guy? Are we supposed to believe all these people are in on it? Or is James just like misremembering these interactions or these planted memories? Like, was James Lasombra a real guy that they maybe cloned and like implanted the memories into this new empty body, which kind of ties into the scene that you briefly talked about earlier?
Yeah. So now let's flash back to one of the things that does give us clues was that Pontifex file he finds on himself the second time he goes to Pontifex. And it has clippings in it like what it's, growing up in San Francisco and local cop loses wife and kids, but it's a picture of a different cop. And ex-cop opens locksmith security shop, but it's a cop by a different name. So you only get these things if you go back and freeze frame them all. But basically, it's the hints that this is the file. This is some clippings that Amanda and her Pontifex friends gathered to use as source material to create this character. But it's really all these things that James thought happened in his life happened to other people.
Plus, we also saw another James
Yes.
at Pontifex, did we not? That's when it kind of falls apart.
That's when my brain
Yeah.
explodes. But that's when you're deep in the shit where like the creature, the empty man, is basically inside his mind at this time. So we can't trust anything we see. So basically, James flashes back to his second visit to Pontifex, which is on day 3, which we're tracking this movie by the 3 days of the empty man. Day 3, he puts on his wedding ring. It's been the first time he's worn it since the accident, we assume. And he goes back, he gets these files. He steps out with the files into this room where these people are trying to summon somebody and saying, if you are there, show yourself. And he accidentally makes a little noise, taps his wedding ring on the column next to him, and they look at him and they say, we see you. But he's on the ground floor. This is not the James who saw that same scene from the catwalk level above. And then
that's the noise that alerted the old James, the other James. It's so hard to parse what we're supposed to pull from this.
Day 2 James is up on the catwalk. Day 3 James is down below. He looks up on the catwalk and he sees himself. And then there's one shot where both of them are in the shot. It's not designed like one of these guys has a limited perspective. The third person narrator just looked and did a 2-shot with 2 Jameses in them. And one of them is existing on a different day than the other one. So like time is entirely fucked. And it's like, okay, well, what the hell does this even mean? But it kind of doesn't give you time because then it sucks you back into the empty man, pours into his mouth and he's done.
So listeners, I'm so sorry to say we don't have the answers here. There is no like definitive, this is what happens. This is how he knew Nora in one scene, but she doesn't know him at the end. This is how these cops had heard of him. Like maybe they're like, I assume Nora's in on it. That makes the most sense that she would just kind of abandon him at the end because she played her part and she doesn't need to interact with him in that way anymore. But there's cops who know his backstory and it doesn't tie everything together for you in a neat little bow. And just listening to conversations with David Pryor, he's not interested in doing that at all. But it does kind of leave you hanging. Like we don't have the answers.
Yeah, it doesn't all connect. And like you said, if you go down this one road of, okay, more people were in on it, he was really a fictional person, then why does the film, at his final moments, really within the last 2 minutes of the film, it spends 1 minute of that in a slow-mo flashback rehash of all of James's most personal and most detailed moments with his wife at Nora's husband's funeral. He's got his hand on Nora's shoulder while his wife is standing next to him. He sends the wife home. He spends the night with Nora. The wife and kid die on the bridge during that time.
He doesn't just spend the night with Nora. They have a very weird, very specific sex scene, and he actually pulls her dress, which is black lace, up over her face when he kisses her, which I'm sure is symbolism for the shrouded figure we've come to understand as the empty man. But it's just so detailed and like, for what? Yeah, to what end? We don't know.
Just after this whole thing has been debunked, they're like, no, actually, here's a totally real version that's much too complex to have been something that these kids made up out of newspaper clippings.
And David Pryor said this. He said, I wanted to present the movie like there are scenes which reinforce certain readings of the ending, and there are scenes that reinforce other readings of the ending. So you have support for whatever you think is really going on here, but that also means that you have things that contradict whatever you think is going on here. There's no neat way to say what really is the truth here. Did Amanda make this all up to test the limits of Pontifex's mental reconditioning, or is everything really on the level and what she says to him is true? We can't say. So it's one of those movies you just kind of got to make your own determinations, but they'll all kind of leave you a little hollow because, like we said, every answer to a question undermines an answer to an alternate question.
Would you say that the movie leaves you feeling a little bit empty?
Oh boy, I would, but I still like it. I just think,
no, we're essentially giving the guy credit for the movie itself pulling off the mindfuck that the villains of the movie are trying to pull off, and it pulled it off on us, and it kind of worked. I gotta sort of, applaud the man.
Now that we're discussing it in this kind of dialogue way, because we text each other like, this doesn't make sense then if this is what happened. But now that we're discussing it, I feel like we've played into Mr. Pryor's hands perfectly. Because a lot of there are podcasts and reviews of this movie, but none of them really dive too deeply into the details of the plot. They're more just like, the scene's so atmospheric. The acting's really good. The dialogue's really good. Isn't this Stephen Root speech really great? But I haven't really heard anyone try to like dive in and explain the movie. And I even did one of those things I hate, which is go to Screen Rant and be like, the Empty Man movie explained. And they were just like, we don't know either. So
you know what? This just proves that we're the only podcast dumb enough to try this shit.
That's right. We're not going to stop now.
We broke our brains. I'm half expecting to step outside my apartment door and have all my neighbors bow down to me after this.
As they should anyway.
Thank you.
It must be a delightful neighbor. I can't imagine that you would be anything but. Chain of Rocks Bridge. That's what it was. Chain of Rocks.
Thank you. Now that's a way to do a callback and wrap up the episode.
Yeah, that was The Empty Man. It's a strange movie, but it's a really good one. I would say I had it as an A before I started thinking way too hard about it. And now maybe it's like a B, but B is still pretty good. It's spooky. It's smart. It's so different from Last Night in Soho. I had whiplash because Last Night in Soho is so bombastic and lively and colorful and loud. And this movie's so quiet and bleak and dreary. eerie.
Monochromatic, more Finchery stuff with those washed out green tones.
The
through
filters.
whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, man. So let's see what some of our faves from this movie have been up to.
All
You
right.
ready?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So James Badge Dale, you might remember, he was in The Kitchen.
He
An
was.
episode we did not too long ago, 2 months ago maybe. He's been in 10 movies since 2018, so he's
damn.
not slacking. He was in The Kitchen. He was in the very good movie Hold the Dark, and also The Standoff at Sparrow Creek, which I've mentioned a few times. I recommend both those movies if you haven't seen them.
Cool.
And we talked about Hold the Dark last week too, didn't we? Oh no, that was the Forest movie with Ben Foster.
Oh,
That
yes.
was the Thomas and McKenzie one, but no, Hold the Dark is the Jeremy Saulnier movie, the Green Room and Blue Ruin guy.
Okay.
So he's moved on from his color phase.
Yeah, no, it's
But,
just dark.
I will check out anything he puts out. I really liked Blue Ruin and Green Room. I would say Hold the Dark is a step below those two, but still pretty good.
Okay.
Since 2020, he starred on the Starz crime thriller Hightown, which is about like the opioid epidemic on Cape Cod. Got renewed for a third season back in March. No idea when that's going to be released, but I'll be there. I watched the first two, enjoyed them both. It's not a perfect show, but it's fun.
Nice. I
Not
gotta
fun. It's good. It's not a fun show necessarily.
Yeah, it doesn't sound fun, but it does sound cool. I'm gonna have to check it, give it a little check out.
It's maybe not as serious as it sounds. It's
Okay.
kind of like it's serialized, follows one big storyline, and it does have some tough scenes to watch, but it also has moments of joy and fun. It's not going to be the crime thriller TV show version of this movie. There is some jokes in it.
Okay, good. That helps.
So Marin Ireland, I'm always shocked to find out that Marin Ireland was not in Justified because she just seems like a Justified person, especially because she was on Sneaky Pete, which was made by the creator of Justified.
Oh,
and ran
okay.
for 3 seasons. Sneaky Pete, a fun little show with Giovanni Ribisi and our boy Ethan Embry from Empire Records, your fave.
Yeah. Wow.
Also had Margot Martindale.
Oh, nice. She's
So
always great.
That's a good one. Yeah, it had 3 seasons. It got canceled, but now Marin Island's been on the Umbrella Academy. She's a main role on that. I have not checked out the Umbrella Academy, but a lot of people I really like it.
I saw the first season. It's really conceptually cool and stylish, and I had some big problems with the story, but it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I might give it a shot. She was also on Why the Last Man, which I was excited about, but got 1 season and is gone forever.
Mhm.
And apparently that 1 season wasn't very good, so I'm going to wait till someone else takes a crack at it.
I sampled it. I think I got 2 episodes in and I dropped it.
I'm hoping someone else picks it up eventually. She's become like a little bit of a horror icon because she was in the very good movie The Dark and the Wicked, which came out last year. Good little horror movie. She was also in The Irishman. She played one of Frank Sheeran's daughters as an adult. She had some good dramatic scenes with Bobby D in that.
Nice.
And she'll be in upcoming Stephen King adaptation, The Boogeyman.
Oh, I'm kind of excited about that. That was one of his short stories that stuck with me as a kid and the first collection of short stories I ever read from him. Really cool.
I don't think I know it. I don't think my short story catalog with King is not as strong as my novels. I remember some of the big ones, but not The Boogeyman.
That's from one of his really early, maybe his earliest collection. I can't say for sure. I'm not that big an expert, but whatever book that's in is worth going back and finding.
Is that the one with the jaunt in it too? Because the jaunt I remember very well.
Oh, it could have had the jaunt because I do remember being affected by the jaunt as a young man too.
That ending.
Yes.
Such a good ending. So Robert Aramayo, his first screen role was in Nocturnal Animals. So that's kind of a big jumping in with both feet to start, working with some powerhouses there. Tom Ford directed that movie. It's always so strange to me that Tom Ford is just a movie director now. Like
Really?
the sunglasses guy? The suits guy?
Interesting guy. Is there a
Yeah.
movie about him yet?
I don't know. I don't know that I think I would like him as a person based on the movies he's made because Nocturnal Animals is technically well made, but it's a tough hang.
I didn't see it, but he does seem like kind of a prickly personality.
It's almost worth watching for the Aaron Taylor Johnson performance alone because every time people are like, I don't know, I don't think that guy can really act. I'm like, he can, but only when he's playing like the worst person in the world.
Oh, okay.
Like his character is real despicable, but he's really good at it.
All right.
Yeah, he was in that. And then he appeared in Galveston, a movie I like, Nick Pizzolatto adaptation starring Ben Foster. I think I brought it for show and tell one week. He was in Mindhunter, Fincher show. So,
Okay.
and Game of Thrones, of course, he played young Ned Stark. And now he's currently playing young Elrond on Rings of Power. And he was also in The Kingsman last year,
Oh, cool.
which was fucking dog shit.
I like the first. That was the sequel. I like the first
It
one.
was the third one.
Okay.
Yeah, there was 2. There was Kingsman, and then there was Kingsman: The Golden Circle, or something like
Yes,
that.
that
And
sounds
then The King's Man was a prequel set during like World War II.
Ah, yes. With our guy, Ray Fiennes.
Yeah, exactly. Sasha Frolova, who played Amanda in here, she was in Mare of Easttown as Missy.
I didn't recognize her, but she was one of those familiar faces.
Also, funnily enough, she was in a short film called Lou recently, but has nothing to do with the Lou you just watched.
Oh, okay.
What are the odds? And she just popped up in Little Women as Mrs. Hummel. So
Oh.
she's getting around. She's doing some cool stuff.
Yeah.
As far as I could tell, David Pryor does not have a movie on the horizon. He got his start, like we mentioned, working on DVDs and Blu-rays, supplemental materials, but he had a pretty critically acclaimed short film back in 2008 called AM 1200, and it was like a 40-minute short film, so just under the cut for being like a real full-length movie. It was well received. Empty Man is still his only narrative full-length film, but he did a lot of work on that Fincher series, Voir. How would you pronounce that?
I think it's voir, like noir.
Voir. It was video essays about cinema. I know you really liked it.
I recommend it. It was uneven because each one was basically a different essayist picking a random little subtopic, whatever part of movie making that they were into and just diving deep into it. And so it's like kind of a glorified version of what you find on YouTube with the movie buff essayists, but
Kind of like the movies that made us, but a little more in depth, a little less for like general audiences.
it goes deep. So if you're a movie buff, I would say definitely check it out. There's some cool stuff in there.
It came and went so fast. I feel like the Netflix algorithm abandons things immediately because I was like, oh, I should check that out. And then I just never saw it on my homepage again.
Yeah, it's
and I just kind of
definitely-
forgot about it.
It's not a broad audience thing. But if you're a movie buff, it's something you should definitely check out.
All right, excellent. But he is making some, narrative stuff. He has a episode coming up in Guillermo del Toro's horror anthology, which he's calling The Cabinet of Curiosities. His episode is called The Autopsy. Will star Luke Roberts, F. Murray Abraham, and Glenn Turman.
That sounds very promising for a lot of reasons.
I'm definitely going to check that out. Every time Guillermo del Toro actually makes something, I have to go see it because, there's always like 14 canceled projects in the wake of it. So that's The Empty Man. We could talk about the box office, but there was no movies in theaters when this came out. The Honest Thief and The War with Grandpa were first and second place when this movie came out. It opened in third with just 1.3 million, which shows you the kind of state movie theaters were in at the time.
And I guess you can go, why did you not market it more? But it's like, there's almost
Right.
no point. So it was just kind of obligatory. Let's dump this out there. But I guess it let the man move forward at least, right? It let us get to
Yeah.
the point where it got to digital and then it got discovered again. And so now we're here and he's moving on.
Yeah, it's like ripping the Band-Aid off. I think this,
Yeah.
if you release this movie in 2021 at the height of the pandemic, it's going to flop no matter how many commercial time you buy for it. So
Yeah.
either hold on to it to when you think people will be back in theaters, but that has its own stigma too. Every time you hear of a movie that was filmed in like 2016 and released in 2022, you're like, that movie probably sucks. So it was kind of a lose-lose situation for him. For a movie that flopped to the box office, it's the best possible outcome. He's getting tons of recognition, accolades, and hardcore fans kind of tuning into his stuff, and they'll be waiting for his next project with great anticipation.
For sure. He's got a great opportunity for a good future.
So that was The Empty Man. Next week, you don't even know what we're doing next week, do you?
I saw it on the thing, but I don't know anything about it. It's going to be another one of those going in blind.
This is much more of like a straight up junky horror movie that's gotten maybe a little bit of a critical reevaluation recently. People seem to be like, no, actually, that's pretty good. But most importantly, the homie Nash Flynn is going to be back for her third appearance on the Blast Zone. Fourth?
I don't know, but
She's been on 3 times already.
Damn.
Yes, this is going to be her 4th appearance. And we're doing the House of Wax remake. House of Wax was like an old 1950s Vincent Price movie.
yes.
But this is the 2005 version
Okay.
with Paris Hilton famously. But there's a lot of names you will recognize in this movie. And like I said, people are starting to come around on it a little bit. I've heard some counter arguments that this movie's actually good.
Well, that sounds
we'll see.
fun. It sounds like trashy enough that, especially with Nash on the show, we can just have at it. She's great with her takes. And then we'll have a little bit of a discussion about, is it good? Is it anything?
So thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back next week. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod. Write us a review if you can. We appreciate it. It helps people find us.
Thank you.
You can follow us on Twitter at BlastZonePod. Shoot us an email, blastzonepod@gmail.com. If you have any questions, suggestions, just want to talk,
Say
we
hi.
appreciate it. And we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
This is a tale of